Hello, hello. I'm here with Dabney Morris, who is a incredibly talented composer, singer-songwriter. I know him mostly as a composer, and I've worked with him in the studio playing his compositions and live recently. Did something live.
Yeah.
But he also is a member of the band Wild Cub, and I just met you probably about a year and a half ago.
I think it was sooner than that. I mean, we met, it would have been in the fall, working on Jake McMullen's record.
Jake McMullen's record,
Yeah.
that's right. And I don't think you were at the sessions we did with Logan for that Closer record.
No.
I think Keegan was there, but
Yeah.
I did play
that
on
was,
that.
wow, yeah.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we played on the same record together, but
Yeah.
we have not met until recently. So
Right.
I tried to, aside from our conversations, I've tried to Google this gentleman, but there's not a lot out there. So I'm flying by the seat of my pants about what I know about him and what so we may go down some interesting paths.
Yeah.
I'm super excited.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it as enigmatic as
good.
possible.
It's good, man.
Maybe, people have just so many offers to do Wikipedia pages for me, and I'm just like, no.
You just don't believe in making money or being
Yeah,
successful?
I'm just trying to stay as under the radar as possible.
The artist formerly known as Dabney Morris.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's a tough life, but somebody's got to live it.
Yeah, for
so,
sure.
dude, let's dive into kind of where you got into. So, would you say that you've probably been in a bazillion bands?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Wild Cub is probably one of the more successful ones that you've been a part of.
Yeah, I mean so Wild Cub started when I started working with them was it would have been 2012. Like January of 2012. And Keegan had just finished up, or he had decided he wanted to stop doing his like solo stuff and wanted to turn it into a band. And at the time I was living with the guitarist of Wild Cub, Jeremy Bullock. And we just we came up with this idea, which isn't, it's not like a really profound idea, but let's convert this, house we were living in Edge Hill into like a makeshift studio and just make a record every month. And I went into it, I was supposed to kind of just engineer it, and then it turned into more of it as it went, it was very clear I'm actually what I'm doing is producing this. It just kind of went from there. They finished the record, and then they went and did a bunch of promo for it and a ton of touring, and I was doing some other stuff at the time. And then the South by maybe that year, or it might have even been the following year, 2013, their drummer couldn't do it. So then they asked me to come, and that's when I became actually a full-fledged member of the band. But before that, it was just produce the record, and then much later it was playing drums with them. But yeah, that was that was the first time I've ever had an experience in a at least from the outside, successful touring band. If you saw the numbers, we actually all walked away, from publishing or any of that stuff. It probably wasn't as grandiose, but there were some rad experiences with it.
I can imagine,
for sure.
And having success as an indie band, period.
Right.
That's crazy.
It was crazy because it was all kind of centered around. It was centered around a lot of radio, which is not a thing that really happens anymore. The whole world of how to do successful premieres and how to promote music, and it's the Wild West all over again. Nobody knows what it's going to take, what's going to happen, and we were right at the tail end of when you could still kind of live off of, or not live off of, but get some numbers from some radio or whatever, and then you take that to a record label and they're like, oh, cool, well, we've got numbers, we've got research, we've got this stuff. We see you're doing well in AAA or on Alt Nation or whatever, and then they'll go off of that. But now it's social media, who knows?
Social media numbers, I guess.
Yeah, right. They want to know your followers all that. But yeah, man, it was a wild ride for sure. It was just a year and a half of nonstop touring. And
so how intense was the touring? Were you just always gone?
Yeah, it was
what were you in? A Sprinter van kind of vibe?
Well, yeah, eventually. Because it started off, So there's probably about a year, I don't know, like 7 months where we were in a 15-passenger van that the sliding door didn't really work on.
Why would it work?
So we'd all filter out the front seat.
Oh, dude.
And the AC would rarely work, and
Oof.
we went through multiple stereos, but eventually we signed with Mom and Pop and took the Advance and blew most of it on a Sprinter, because at that point we were just like, we were tired of, we want to be able to play some video games and sit in bucket seats which I probably now have back problems from how comfortable I got in those seats. But yeah, I mean, it was, at the very end of it too, we got to do a bus tour, which was great. We were opening up for Bleachers.
Nice.
And at that point we were all so worn out that we were like, we're getting a bus. It's so ridiculous for us to get a bus, but we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we did, because it would have, I mean, we're like chasing this band around through the night, overnight stuff. Yeah. Of course, I think our bus driver at the time was like, knew we were a little green with a bus. So we found out later that he would just kind of pull over in the middle of the night and like sleep for a while we were sleeping, and then just like get back on the road, because he's like, oh, it's only 4 hours away. And, it was a little sketchy.
Billable sleep time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But
no bus drivers are ever sketchy, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're all great.
They only hold your life in their hands.
Right. I learned very quickly not to sleep on any of the top bunks.
Yes.
You get the bottom bunk as quickly as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I kind of like the motor noise. First of all, I hate sleeping on a tour bus.
Right.
But if I'm going to sleep on the tour bus, it's going to definitely be the bottom, and it's going to be near the motor to drown out everything else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I will say this, man, I'm slagging on bus drivers, but I've had hundreds over I've been Mr. Sub on tours, so it's like I've had so many drivers. On some tours, there are certain drivers that quit because there's a little bit too much partying going on.
Right.
So I've had a lot of drivers on some tours that have just recycled themselves.
Right.
But you want to get a good one, because that's a big deal. But but man, I've had some. I've been on a bus that's like hit a deer, and it's like you feel the impact of it, even all the way in the back.
Right.
And buses are such a dangerous thing. Did you ever see? I don't want to take this in a negative place, but did you see that? The Humboldt, Saskatchewan hockey team recently that the bus crashed.
Oh yeah.
And it's like I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It's so many kids. I think it was 15 kids passed away.
Right.
And you look at the bus and you look at how it was ripped up and taken, and you can't help but think of all the hours you've spent on these buses, like putting your life in the hand of these drivers.
Well, what's scary too is like now there's all these other options for touring that a lot of musicians are doing, which is like these kind of pimped out Sprinters that have, it's literally like somebody goes in with some like crappy wood framing and makes these beds or does whatever. It's not like steel reinforced or anything like that. At least a bus has like some sort of steel reinforced frame or like the and I'm not I've had friends who've toured like that, and on a budget, and you're trying to drive through the night, and like but it's still dangerous, man. It's scary, and especially when you like get jolted awake because somebody had to swerve, and you're like, did they just doze off? I don't know. I'm in my bunk. I sure hope they didn't just doze off.
Dude, I was just out with and I'll say the artist, and I don't remember the driver's name, but I was out with Jamie Johnson the very last time I was out, and his driver for the band like literally saved our lives, because it was some guy coming head on in the wrong direction in the highway.
Oh my God.
And we felt it. Like he told us about it. He like pulled to the left, and he saw the lights go to his left.
Yeah.
And I felt it in the middle of the night.
Right.
But you're sitting there and you're like, oh, okay. We're good.
Yeah.
We're moving. And I wake up and they tell you the story, and they're like, Tyler, you would not believe what happened last night. And you're like, holy crap, we were that close.
Yeah. And you just kind of slept through it.
And you just slept through
it.
Yeah.
Your life flashed before your dreaming eyes.
Yeah. And I couldn't, I've never really done a van. I did one van tour at the beginning as far as with a band. But then the van stuff that I've always done has been like corporate gigs or things driving back through the night.
Sure.
But I couldn't imagine doing a van tour where you've just played a show and given your heart out, and then got in the driver's and just like and then
and you got to chase a bus.
Oh,
that's when it gets really wild. And I don't know how a lot of these bands do it. That was the main reason we did this bus thing then. But yeah, that's like course, that's the other thing. I mean, it's touring is just so grueling, and it like, I mean, we had a great run. I mean, we went across the United States probably 5 times. We went to London 3 times. We played in
beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, we like, it was great. We played television. We played we played Kimmel or Fallon before he was doing the Tonight Show, right? Tonight Show or Late Show.
He's the Tonight Show.
He's the Tonight Show.
Sorry.
So before he was doing the Tonight Show, we played on there, and then we played on Conan, and like we did a lot of cool stuff,
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, and this is why Wild Cub eventually broke up, which was probably just a couple months ago, not too long ago. Was just because it's just grueling, and you get to a point when you're like in your 30s and you're trying to make money, and for some of those guys supporting a family, Keegan especially trying to support a family, and it just like it gets to a point that unless you're kind of a hired gun and you can go out and you're making really good money, but it's just a thing that you're not like super emotionally attached to.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets tough. God, loading drums out, in and out every night, setting up like.
Yeah.
And of course, I was the guy who knew how to pack the Sprinter.
Of course.
So I was like, had to be out there.
Not you.
Yeah. It's just like it's like I was really good at Tetris. These are really actually my only skills. I'm good.
That's what you played the video
Tetris.
game. You sat there in those things playing Tetris.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good at Tetris and packing vans. So that's really what my Wikipedia page would say. It's like known for his van packing.
Yeah.
And also, his mom said he's great at Tetris.
Man, it's interesting to I haven't had this conversation on the podcast yet. I talked with Roy Agee a little bit about this at the beginning, about the different things that you do as you kind of go through the process of this musical life that we all live. But
yeah.
It's not to say that you don't have amazing experiences, but it's people look at that dream and they look at what it takes.
Right.
There's probably somebody that's listening to this somewhere that's listening to it and going, man, I'm 18 years old and I want to start a band and I want to tour.
Sure.
And it's like you just have to. I think you have to just love it, man. It's just like you have to believe in it, so that those moments that whatever that is, whether it's producing or whether it's you're on stage, whether it's the crowd feeding you, whatever that is, or it's your music being played live, it's like you have to believe in that so hard.
Absolutely.
And it just doesn't exist. I mean, it's not the 70s anymore where
Yeah.
that was the days where I remember reading the Billy Joel biography, which is great. I forget which one it is. There's one that wasn't written by him. That's the good one.
Yeah.
It's like Liberty DeVito's perspective a lot.
Right. Right.
And anyway, they talked about his days back as a label, and they would cut a record, and then they would put it out on the radio, and it wouldn't do well. And they'd be like, okay, go cut another one. It's like it was just like that. The record was important, and the touring was so secondary.
Yeah.
And the money from that would pay for it. And now it's the touring that's paying for everybody to make records.
Well, now it's even less the touring. I mean, it's why you see the rise of like so many licensing and ad agencies that are starting to like, and the deals are getting worse and worse with those agencies. For a while, it's 20%,
Tell me about it.
and then it's 30%. Now, like a standard is 50%, which is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like they're taking literally half of what you would make off of something. But yeah, I mean, it really is, and all this, all this stuff about grueling touring and terrifying bus experiences and small sprinters and all that. I mean, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah,
it was incredible. It was like, I mean, I would recommend it to anybody who wants to just try it. Even if they're not sure if they love it, because that's a quick way to learn whether or not you do.
Yeah.
And for me, it was realizing, well, I don't love touring, but I definitely love making music. So, but it really is. It's you have to love it. You have to want to do it every day. I mean, I don't know how these road dogs do it, man. Honestly, I don't know how. I mean, of course, you're on a bus when you go. This is a little better, but you're not so much road dogging these days.
No,
right?
not anymore. That was the last one I did, which was earlier this year.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to try to stay home and do more stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
there are elements of it that I miss. Like I miss I do miss the camaraderie of like there is a family element to it.
Absolutely.
It's like a forced
Yeah,
family element.
right.
More forced in my world because I'm a sideman, but in a band there's a family element
Sure.
to it. Got everybody's back. But I also miss like being in a new place and waking up and like putting on running shoes and just going. You know? It gets a little grueling when you're, especially country tours, when you're waking up in the middle of nowhere and the closest hotel is 12 miles and there's just dirt.
Doing
you're playing
state
a rodeo.
fair stuff,
Yeah.
or like doing those radio things outside of an amphitheater.
Oh, yes.
We did one. God, I don't even know where it was. It was like Cold War kids, and we're out in the parking lot. I mean, one of the things that was tough about when we were touring on a single that was, which was Thunderclatter, and that was the song everybody knew. So when we would do these radio shows, I mean, we get tweets that say things like, "Really love this new Wild Cub by the band Thunderclatter."
Oh,
Because
nice.
people were, I mean, it's like,
You're just so known by that.
yeah, but I mean, so you play these shows and they would just wait for the single to be played, and then you're out in literally a parking lot of an amphitheater, and then you play the song and everyone would just leave, go in, find their seat. I mean, it felt like a sideshow. Wow. It was really strange. We did so many of those radio shows, so many of those.
But that's the hustle, though. That's what you got to do, right?
Yeah, I think so. And again, I don't know if it is anymore. I mean, it's like, I imagine there's still that world. I mean, I never listened to like Alt Nation or any of these like kind of weird it's like top 40 alt indie, playlists. It's not the pop playlist, but I mean, I imagine that world still exists, and there's still plenty of bands who are day in and day out going to do that middle of the summer, loading out, no AC, no green room.
Yeah.
You're asking for some water, and they're trying, it's like, oh, I don't know, you got to talk to so-and-so. Yeah, I mean, it's like, that's when it gets really tough. And, there's plenty of bands who, go out and have great opening gigs for a long time or play like smaller venues. And we did our fair share of that, but so much of what we did revolved around the radio thing. I think that if I could offer any advice to anybody, it's like, try and be a little more well-rounded with the direction you go in, pursuing the marketing and all of that, than just being like putting all your eggs in one basket of like radio or whatever, hoping you get a number one single.
Yeah.
Well,
I think the way that things are getting, I mean, the first one that I remember is Joshua Radin, who broke through Grey's Anatomy. And it's like, I think licensing is the way to break now. I mean, that's the way that you get the most access to people.
Sure.
Get yourself in like a really poignant spot in a television show, and
Right.
it's like, I mean, that happened a little bit with one of the projects that I had, like a very, very, very small bit, but yeah, I had a project called Maxwell Winters, and it was in a Degrassi scene, and it was like on Netflix, and it was like the whole song.
Right.
And I was like, that's cool. The Netflix thing released, and then over the next 2 or 3 weeks, I was seeing heavy traffic on Spotify just from that moment,
Right.
And that's the goal. And I mean, it paid peanuts,
Right.
but it's
Of
that
course.
exposure, right?
Well, and then there's the whole back end of that too. I mean, it's not like it used to. It's
True.
not as much as it used to be with, PROs and residuals and licensing for a certain amount of time. I mean, it's like all those models are starting to go out the window too, because it's like, well, it's a streaming service, so it's not like it's airing or re-airing, and you're going to get whatever stuff on the back end for that. So they have to buy out, your rights or whatever, and it's becoming more like lump sums, or more saying like, well, we can offer smaller amounts because, everyone's chomping at the bit to get these spots on whatever, Netflix or Hulu or any of those spots. And it's like, I don't know. It's the wild, wild west all over again.
Well,
Is.
let's talk about dynamics, because this is another conversation I'm curious about in a band, because I tried to do that when I was younger with two of my really good friends who are still my really, really good friends. And I was the leader, and I was like the one that was making everybody. And not only that, it was like a jazz trio, so that you're already off. You're already out of the gates, failing.
Right.
But it was great. We had a thing, and it was when we were in school. Like it was a thing that like we would play a weekly, and it was like frat guys would show up, listen to us like blow Coltrane songs, So we had a thing, and it was cool. But we did some touring, and we like did clinics and workshops, kind of like very small version of what Snarky Puppy at the beginning, and I give all the credit to Michael League for that, because he's kicking ass, and he put all of his eggs in that basket, and it worked.
Right.
and I don't know how he did it, wrangling all those people. They're all beautiful people, and they're good people. But at some point, you reach a point where it's like, I can't do this anymore, you know. And I did it with just two, where I was like, well, you want to do a family, and you are going here. It's like, well, you can't hold that together.
Yeah.
As much as I wish that I had, and I miss it, it just wasn't right. So I'm curious. You guys had a really long run. Like, how did the dynamics of that maintain itself? Like, how does that happen for people that want to have a band?
Yeah, right. I mean, band dynamics are a weird thing because I moved to Nashville just playing my own music, and then I started working with a guy playing in a band called Tallest Trees for a long time before I played in Wild Cub. And then after Wild Cub, I played in a band that a lot of Nashville folks will know called Myzica, and co-produced on that and played drums in that. And band dynamics are weird because every time it's totally different, and it's completely dependent on the personality of the person who's in charge, you know.
Okay.
So it's
so
like
there needs to be a leader.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's got to be, you know. I mean, it's like otherwise you're just going to run down the hole of everybody just offering up suggestions that no one ever, you know, takes, that no one ever decides on.
Absolutely.
So like Tallest Trees was kind of a weird, perfect democratic system because there was just two of us, and we would just come to a compromise about, you know, whatever. Wild Cub was very much Keegan's thing, and in the studio it was a lot different because there was just three of us, and we were, you know, bouncing ideas off each other, and like somebody might have a great idea and we go down that road, or I'd have a great idea and we go down that road. But being on the road and being in the studio, it's often very different too, because you look at, you know, the person who's in charge of making all the decisions on the road might not be the person with all the great musical ideas, or the person to like know how to get whatever out of, you know, out of drums or out of guitar, or, you know, might not be as melody minded, or but yeah, I mean, that's like, so like in Myzica it was a very different thing too, because the guy who was kind of the band leader there, he's a producer named Micah Talks, who you should get on this too, because he's a great dude.
Yes.
But he was much more like, he wanted to know exactly what everybody else was thinking before he'd make a decision about something. So band dynamics are weird, but I mean, what it really boils down to is like, for me, the less people you have in a band, the easier it is. Because the more people you have, especially when you're on the road, and you're trying to balance like all these personalities, all these different needs about who, you know, needs, I mean, just stuff stupid that's like diets.
I was just thinking that, like if there's a vegetarian in the band, that like is elevated like by 1,000 times.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you like how, to this day, I can't eat Subway because we got to a point. We got to a point in one of the bands where it was like, where one of the guys, it was with his band Tallest Trees, and he was vegan, and literally the only place he could eat on the road was at Subway, and so we go to Subway, and
go
it's
North
like,
America, go.
I know. It's like, but yeah, dynamics are so interesting because, especially being somebody like Wild Cub is a great example because. Keegan's the type of guy who knows exactly what he wants, and he's the guy with the final say, which is a totally amiable quality, because I'm much more like, I want to make everybody happy, I want to make sure everybody's is comfortable and all these things. And it was weird for me being in a position of that, because I'm generally used to being the guy calling the shots. So to kind of have to put myself in a position of like, all right, I'm kind of a subordinate, was definitely tough at times, you know. So it's tough.
Was it fun? Like, do you feel like you grew from that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we all grew from it. You know, I mean, we all learned a lot about, I don't know, just how we interact with, I don't know, I mean, there's so many stories I probably can't even talk about with, you know, crazy situations, but yeah, and we're all still, what's crazy to me is that, you know, we went through that much touring, and we're all still friends. Like we all, I mean, I was just in LA last week hanging out with Jeremy and Keegan.
That's something, man.
Which is amazing. Yeah. I mean, that's not to say that there weren't times when, you know, we maybe wanted to hit each other, but it does kind of grow this like family dynamic to a point where can get into like a throwdown fight, and then the next day you're just like, hey, are we cool, man? It's like, yeah, we're cool.
Because something escalates. To
Yeah.
a point. Yeah, like a brother.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
But yeah, exactly. Like a brother or, a sister or whatever. You just know that like I can escalate this because the forgiveness is kind of already built in.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And that's not to say that it's not like that for every band, because, some bands that
Just
doesn't.
stay away
yeah.
from the lead singer's face. Right?
right.
So it's I'm thinking kind of analogy would be like a sports team, and I want to ask this question of you. So if you look at a sports team, I mean, you can walk into. I think of hockey all the time because I'm obsessed with it. But,
yeah, sure.
And I think a dressing room in hockey is so different comparatively to like a baseball or a football, where you can have these cliques. In hockey,
Well, first of all, they have totally different balls. And
True.
Like,
yeah.
Hockey has a puck, so I
It's
can
not
see
even
how
a ball.
it'd be.
So yeah.
Yeah. But
yeah, you can have these cliques that exist, and
Yeah.
they can function inside of that. But with a band, you can't have that, obviously.
Right.
And they always say in hockey, even if you don't get along and hate somebody,
Yeah.
they have those a lot in hockey too,
Right.
where there'll be fights in practices
Yeah,
because
sure.
something has escalated, and then
Right.
they'll hug each other out after.
Right.
But also the power of success.
Sure.
I mean, do you feel like that kind of softened some of the issues that a band?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I mean, if you're ramming your head against the wall and you're not
Right.
doing anything, that's gonna cause a lot of problems.
Right.
So would you say that success and going always making sure that you're moving in a direction is an important thing?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I'll give you. So when we played Fallon, we were using all backlined gear, and at that point we were using tube amps, and we were running a track system that at that point I wasn't running the track system. It was run by the keyboard guy, which we, after this experience, we fixed, or maybe not fixed, but rearranged. So we went through and we did all the rehearsals, and it was going great and it was feeling good. And we didn't take into account that when he introduces us, that they're going to leave the room mics open so we could hear the applause, which is like, they're like, so you can get amped up and get ready to play.
Yeah.
And of course, we didn't take into account that we all have in-ears, and the applause sounds a hell of a lot like stick clicks and like a click track. So we got off from the tracks, and then on top of that, they had turned off all the amps and turned them on right before we were going to go on stage. So the tubes hadn't warmed up.
Yeah.
So it was this crazy experience where we got to the end of it and we looked around like, that was our debut on national television. That was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. So Jimmy Fallon comes up afterwards and he like leans in. He's like, "Listen, we saw you guys had an issue with that thing. We're gonna let you do it again. Just treat it like it's a whole new thing." And we did it again, and it was fine. But I mean, we walked away from it just being like, because you want that feeling. You have this idea. It's like I've literally, since I was 12 years old, I have this image of myself playing on television.
Dude,
and
yes,
we just bombed the first. I mean, it was like. And who knows? I mean, you look back on it now. Some people might say, like, "Dude, like our publicist was in the audience, and she was like, I'm glad we went with the second one, but the first one was fine."
Yeah.
But of course, we're like so self-conscious about it. We've been building up to this thing, so that one was like a little soured. So I think success for sure, but I think it also is a matter of managing expectations and also what it means. Like what the idea of success is in that sense, because if it's all your wildest dreams coming true, then you're just going to be disappointed no matter how successful you are, which is going to end up being toxic in a band environment. I mean, even if everything seems to be going well, but if your idea of success is like some unattainable thing, no one's going to be happy. So yes and no. I mean, there's other circumstances where we played like. I mean, we got to open for Vampire Weekend twice, which was insane.
Nice.
And they were just these incredible shows. We walked away from those with just like walking on air. Like, I can't believe we got to do that. So it's a little bit of both, but I really think it's like you have to go into it with a certain realistic expectation, or just being willing to roll with whatever, like maybe success is it's just playing on TV in the first place, right? Like, which it should be. But of course, we at that point were like, no, it needs to be like this certain way. So I don't know. I think it can be both. But
I mean, is it part of it is just being grateful for anything that comes along? Is it that naive? Like, is it like, okay, no, we can't just be grateful for this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who knows? I mean, there's plenty of folks that I know that I feel like always had that attitude. Like Natalie Press is a great example of somebody who, I mean, she's always worked her butt off and she's always done what's true to herself. But she's always struck me as somebody who's just like, yeah, I'm just happy to be playing music and playing shows and doing all this stuff, saying yes to things. I mean, she went out opening on a tour for us. She played by herself with like an omnichord and like an SPDS, and she would trigger a beat and do this thing, and it was really kooky and cool, and like, you know, to half full, you know, 100 cap clubs. And she just had a great time. She had a great time on the road. And now she's like, you know, she's about to go open for Casey Musgraves. I think that there's a lot to be said about being grateful for what you do being a definition of success. Like if I can wake up tomorrow...
Grateful for the process.
Grateful for the process,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
If I get to wake up tomorrow and I get to do what I love, I mean, as you know, cliche and simple as that sounds, I think it's very true. And I wish I could go back to like that time when I was in that band. Not that we didn't have those moments, for being very grateful for what we have. But if I'd had that attitude the entire time, I mean, we'd all had that attitude the entire time we were in that band, it might look a lot different. You know, we might still be playing now. We might have maybe not seen all the success we saw then, but maybe we'd be seeing that success now. I don't know. But I do think, I think that's a great point. I mean, it is about being grateful for what you do.
And I guess loving the process too.
Absolutely.
And standing by it.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing. I mean, if you have, we talked on this thing with other people that are much like you, producers, artists, been in, not so much the band thing, but just creative beings. And it's like,
Sure.
being perceived is something that comes into all of our minds.
Absolutely.
And for her, it sounds like maybe that level is not as high as some of ours. You
Right.
know, she's just like, I'm just going to do this because I love it.
Exactly.
And I mean, I think that's built into us, and I think that not caring
Sure.
comes over time as we get older.
Yeah.
But to have that and build from that place to start, I mean, that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and I think it's funny because it's one of those things that like, you know, it's like the whatever experiment with the cat in the box. It's like as soon as you observe the cat, you change the. I can't think of the. It's a quantum physics experiment.
Oh, okay.
But it's the same type of thing where it's like, okay, well, if I maybe am just trying to be less aware of how I'm perceived, then maybe I'll. But that in and of itself is being aware of how you're perceived. You know?
I see what you're saying.
So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
But. Yeah, it's a weird thing. I mean, it's like it's almost one of those things that you just kind of have to be that way anyway. But you know, along with that, you look at anybody who is successful in a kind of maybe an influential way, right? Like people who, I mean, you know, currently, I mean, who's big names like Kevin Parker or Tame Impala, or like any of these really big names who have just been unbelievably influential in the indie scene. And they started off just doing whatever the hell they wanted. You know, I'm sure there's a certain amount of perception, but it was all based on their standards of what they thought was cool, not what maybe they thought everyone else wanted.
And that's a security that I think in today's day and age is not. It's interesting that you say that, because if you think about influencers and you think about social media and branding and all these people that are incredibly careful about how they're perceived,
Exactly.
and how they're perceived is how they make
Right.
a living.
Right.
The idea, and they're some of the most insecure people on planet Earth.
Sure, absolutely.
So then you have these people that kind of like are like these beautiful little flowers that come up where they're just like, I don't care. And
Right.
it's so much more refreshing now than it would have been 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Because they just don't exist.
Yeah.
And it's like they're like aliens. It's like you're looking at them and you're like, wait a minute, like you don't care about how that Instagram, and that's the way that I was just having this conversation yesterday with a good friend of mine, and his wife, she's a great artist, and they were talking about some of a comedian that was one of their favorite comedians. Sure. And she's I had never heard of her before, but she's incredibly funny. She's also very beautiful, but she also puts like posts like, I just woke up this morning and this is what I look like. And
Right.
it's like, and you see that and you're like, human. It's a human,
Right,
you know,
right,
and it's like we're all
right.
human. Like
Yeah.
just be genuine.
Yeah.
And I think that we're all grabbing and looking for those people.
Absolutely.
And that's the future. To me, that's where all of this branding and I think music has always had those people that pop up.
Sure.
Like an Amy Winehouse or an Adele. It's like I'm just me, but I'm also talented and I'm working really hard.
Right.
You know.
Well, I think too. I mean, I don't think that it's any more or less common to have these like very enigmatic, very true to themselves people. I just think that it feels less common because now we're so aware of everybody else around us.
True.
In a way
Everybody
that we've
has a
never,
voice.
that we've never been before.
Yeah.
So when you have that many people who are trying to be unique, they all just end up being, the same.
Yeah.
And then when somebody actually pops out, it seems way more like a unicorn than maybe it actually is,
And it's an incredible opportunity for people right now to
sure,
do that.
absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, but I do think that it does breed a certain amount of overly self-awareness. But more than that, like I think that how people perceive you kind of thing from an artist standpoint really stems from seeing how people perceive somebody that you respect, maybe.
I see what you're saying.
And so and now that we have that right at our fingertips, we can follow every single person that we respect, and then we see, oh, well, what are they doing to be successful and all these things, and then we have this like Me Too kind of idea that like, well, if I just do that, or I could do that too, so and that will bring me, success and what I want to be, rather than maybe somebody like who everybody who we've been talking about, where they're just like, no, I just liked making music and that's what I did. And, it's the idea that success ensues. Like you don't pursue it, it follows you as long as you're trying to do something that makes you happy or something that you love, and we have such an opposite mindset about that. And that like, especially artists have that opposite mindset of like, if I just do this, then that'll make me successful.
Yeah. Well, because it's not tangible. That's the thing about it. It's
exactly.
Like that's what coming to terms with that. That's a recent thing for me about realizing that you have to have tangible things in your life.
Sure.
Like the simplicity of cutting your own grass and looking at it just as an analogy of looking at, I did that action and I did that. Now it takes a lot more skill to be like, I created this piece of music. And it is tangible when you sit back and you hit play and you're like, okay, cool, it's done. That's what it is. But you look at making a living and you look at your life. It's like, well, I could go and do tangible things and cut grass the rest of my life for $35 a lawn.
Sure.
Or I could do this intangible thing that I've worked really hard at and I may not get anything out of it.
Right.
But it could lead to something, or it could lead to something more tangible. So it's an interesting belief system that you have to have in yourself that what you're doing is the right path.
Yeah.
And I think that happens for so many. I think as we are all evolving as artists, and I mean, I want to talk about kind of the next phase of your life, which you've always probably been doing, which is kind of the composition side of yourself.
Yeah.
But there's elements of when you make that leap and you're like, well, I want to dive into something different. I think the how you're perceived thing starts like flashing in your brain, like that part of your brain where you're like, oh no, am I doing this right? Am I making the right choice? Yeah. I think as we get older and we do more of those things, like I've probably changed my path musically maybe 5 times, and I'm in like the biggest personal transition of what I want to do with my life now. And it started out with like, I talk about it on this podcast, like even the idea of starting a podcast talking about this stuff. It's like, I mean, I was sitting there like, I can't do this because people are going to think this, people are going to think that. They're going to know the real Tyler, like all that bullshit. And I'm just like, screw it, let's do it. And then nothing but positive things where people are like, man, I listened to that, it made me do this, and like, this is great. Yeah. So you're in a position where you as you get older, that the perception factor like goes down, where you're like, oh, I'm good, like I believe in myself, because as we get older, we believe in ourselves more. So when you obviously you've gone through it, and the way that you're talking about the Wild Cub experience is, and you're saying you're comparing yourself to another artist that is doing this. Sure. And you're saying, well, I don't really have a lot of that, but I have some of it, and I did have some of that. And And obviously, if something goes awry on stage too, you're concerned about how that's being perceived
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
well. Which is hilarious because most people will not even notice that it's happening.
Right.
But you're so inside of it that whatever. So you have that. So when you kind of, I mean, you're kind of bearing your soul now more with your compositions and doing, like, you're writing these pieces and they're being performed and they mean something to you. So and that's tangible. Like, I'm looking at a chart that you wrote and I'm about to play that.
Right.
How do you? I know you're about to move to LA, and I know you talked about getting more into some film stuff and things like that. So as you're making this transition, how do you feel? Like, where point do you feel that you're at, first of all, and second of all, what kind of is your upward motion? Like, what are you moving towards?
Right.
You know?
Well, the thing about moving towards composition is that, I'll speak really quickly on that, has always been a thing that whenever I started writing music, I've always, when I was 16, I was in a Christian ska band.
And all those things influence what you're doing now. Of
Absolutely.
Course. Yeah.
But I've always written for.
By the way, I'm going to look for that.
Oh gosh, yeah. I'll you can find it still. A buddy of mine does not let me live it down, actually.
Perfect.
But even then, I was writing charts for, we had a trombone and a trumpet and a sax player who played alto and tenor, and then when I went to college, I studied music. I studied percussion there and did a record that had, like, string quartet stuff on it. And I've always kind of been doing it. But the idea that you have as especially now, I feel like, or at least when I was in school, is that if you want to be a successful musician, you got to be a singer-songwriter, right? Like, you got to be somebody. You look at all the people who we consider the greats of the past, whatever, half century or a century or whatever. It's Dylan and it's McCartney and it's Lennon and it's Led Zeppelin and it's everybody who had the whole package. They were great songwriters, they were great poets, they were hip dudes, they were in with the zeitgeist. Like, you had to be all these things. And so, I tried to be that. I wanted to be that. I wanted to have the full package. And I eventually got to a point where I hated doing it because I'm a horrible lyricist. I'm a horrible poet. And I've always been bad at it. And it's one of those things you're like, well, eventually maybe I'll get better at it. And it's like, no, man. You're not going to get any better at it.
Put it to bed.
But once I'm
sure you would have. If it was, if you were passionate about it.
And that's the other thing is, like, I was never super passionate about it. And, it's like...
Well, those two things together that's fail.
Right, yeah.
You need to stop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you look at people like Ezra Koenig or something, Vampire Weekend again. He, like, is one of the most brilliant living lyricists. And it's when you're going back to the whole comparing yourself and Me Too and all that stuff, and that's what you, like, that's what I want to attain. I want to be that good at some point. And you realize, like, I will never be that good at writing lyrics in 5 lifetimes, Once I realized that I was really bad at that, and accepted that, then I thought, well, what is there now? Like, how do I make music? And around the same time, my aux cable broke in my car, so I just, like, it's like, okay, I can listen to NPR, or I can listen to Lightning 100, which is great. Not my bag, but...
Although they probably play a lot of Wild Cup.
Yeah, well, they did, yeah. Or whatever other stations in Nashville, or the classical station, which we have one of the best in the nation here. We have a fantastic classical station in Nashville. So I started listening to it, like, incessantly, and I all of a sudden realized, like, wait, I could write music like this. Like, why? What's wrong with doing that?
Wow. And
started getting into all these, like, modern composers in, like, New York, people like Caroline Shaw and Christopher Cerrone and Timo Anders and Andres, I forget how to pronounce his name, but artists like that. A lot of great living film composers, all the ones everybody knows, like Olafur Arnolds and Johan Johansson, and
I love
folks like that. I mean, it's like Ryuichi or whoever. Like, they're all just like they're just making music that is emotive in the way that music was always emotive up until about 1930, right? I mean, it's like librettos and operas were a whole different style of music that was, like, great, but that was a show that you put on. It wasn't like you would,
supporting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when people would write music, it would be much more in the vein of music is its own form of conversation. It's its own form of expression. You know, the minute you try to, I don't know, I just had a realization. It's like, I can say what I want to say without having to actually say it, you know? So it kind of opened up this whole world in going into composition. And I also realized, and this is kind of going back to the whole process thing, that music is unique in its form because it started as a performance art, right? Like, you look at, like, especially any visual art, which is what we're tied to now, is not all necessarily performance art. But music started as a performance art.
Yeah.
And so the whole concept of music is that the joy of it comes in the performance of it, which comes in the writing of it, which comes in, and so in a
Not
weird
the recording
way,
of it.
and
that's
of the
interesting
recording of
thinking
it,
about that,
and in a weird way, when recording came into play, like, I always get to the end of writing a piece and I listen to it and I feel accomplished, but I feel a little like hungry again. You know, it's like
when I get to hear it again.
yeah, it's like having the piece finished, and you know, you hear it played, which is a wonderful, exhilarating experience, especially if you wrote it for an ensemble and it's being played by that ensemble. It's incredible. But at the end of it, you're like, okay, well, now what? Because the whole thing that's fun about it and is you know, fulfilling about it is the process, because composing is a performance, right? Like, you are constantly playing the piece over and over again. You're playing it in, you're listening back, or you're playing it on piano, you're writing it down, you're tweaking it, you're just performing it over and over and over and over again. And that's where the joy in it lies.
I've never thought of it that way.
So,
That's
yeah,
interesting.
and it's like, music is so weird in that sense that, like, it's no wonder we get to this point where people are so worried about how they're perceived in music, because it all is about the performance of it. Because even when you're not in the room and somebody's listening to your record, they're listening to your performance. So it all becomes about that, and it's all about how you carry yourself in this singular moment, and how, like, that moment is gone later on. Like, even if it's recorded, how you were in that moment, you can't do it again. You know? So it's really, it kind of has opened my mind to how, I don't know, like, just a perception of how I write music, how I think about it being performed, and how it ties into being a language that doesn't, I mean, I rarely listen to music that has lyrics anymore, because the emotion that a single melodic phrase can give you is infinitely deep, right? Whereas as soon as you put words on top of it, there's only so many levels. You know, it immediately kind of boxes it off. Not in a bad way. I mean, it's great that you can do that with words, and it has its own depth in its own right. But, I mean, melody is just like, as soon as you try to explain it with words, you've cheapened it. Because the melody itself is the communication, right? Like, the melody is expressing what it's supposed to express, or the harmony or whatever. And being able to do that, and being able to say this, it's more daunting in a way, but it feels more natural also. It's like, I can write a melody. I can explain what I want to explain in a melody, and not even explain it. I can just, you know, pour out what I'm feeling in this, I don't know, language or communication or whatever, in a way that maybe I don't even understand, you know? Whereas, like, writing words, I would only ever say exactly what I meant.
Well, that's. I mean, it's interesting. You said earlier, you said you can say something without saying it. You know, and I think some of the great lyricists can do that too.
Absolutely,
I mean, like Dylan did that.
Yeah.
I mean, like a Rolling Stone. Like, that's, you know, we can think of that in 10 different ways of what that could be.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I mean, we've had lyric conversations on this thing, and we talk about the literal way that people are doing music now. And we were talking last night again at the same dinner about Ed Sheeran, and he has this beautiful song called "Supermarket Flowers," and it's like just literal, like, I pour the ginger beer down the sink, I'm folding clothes, like, and that's a very literal thing. And I think coming back to what you're doing and what you're talking about, I think being a melodic lyricist, which is kind of what you're explaining, melody being the focal point. I think that one of the reasons why maybe the 1930s, like, things kind of got away from that being the mainstream, is because it takes it takes energy to invest in that. And that's what we were talking about, how songwriting is changing. Like even the latest John Mayer record, like he's talking about text messages, he's talking about shampoo, like he's talking about these little things, because I think our society, that's the amount of attention that they're willing to put on that.
Absolutely.
As a whole, as a if you want to reach the masses, this is what these are your check boxes, go for it.
Right.
But I think that there are audiences that exist, especially now with social media and stuff like that you can achieve and you can get to, that are willing to invest the time and to hear a melody and to interpret that, because they have to interpret it. I mean, it's not shoved down their throat.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's interesting. Thank God that aux cable broke. Because it's interesting that you are able to, like, that was a world that opened to you.
Absolutely,
you know, because you had been in such a lyric world,
right?
And you obviously at that, like, how old would you have been at that point? Like,
I mean, this was probably, I mean, and all that's to say, it's not. I don't want it to make it sound like, wow, classical music sure is neat. Like, I've always loved classical music and all. I just never
we all peripherally hear
it. Exactly. It was very peripheral at that point. Peripheral. It was very much that at that point, and I appreciated it in certain ways. And I'd pull, there's a song that I literally ripped off from the second movement of Ravel's string quartet. Like I pulled the chords straight out of it for a song I wrote like 10 years ago or something. But when it really opened up for me was honestly, it was like last year. And it all had kind of, also I'm a very horrible cellist, but I'd had this cello sitting around. Yeah. You don't ever want me to record, for you, but I'd had this cello sitting around too, and I'd just gotten it. I was like, this is such a waste that it just sits around. I should get it set up. How expensive could it be? Yeah. And the answer to that, of course, is very, very expensive.
It's not like a guitar.
Yeah. So I got it set up, and I was talking to my wife about it. She's like, well, if you're going to spend that much money on it, you better be playing it. Yeah. So I started taking lessons again, and started getting really into, I mean, it's like, and at the same time, I was like, well, I should get better at piano too, and all these, and it's like, if you want to get better at those instruments, you aren't going to sit down and pull open, like, I mean, sure, you can, like, all right, I'm going to learn to play Imagine on piano, but then 30 minutes later, you're like, okay, cool, I know how to play Imagine. What's next? It's not like sitting down and trying to learn, Girl with the Flaxen Hair or something like that. It's hard. It's in G sharp.
Well, it's like, I mean, there are people that would love that. I mean, that's their thing.
Absolutely, and I love it too. I mean, I'm a horrible sight reader, and it's like, anyway. So all that to say, it's like, it's a little like very exciting, but also kind of, I'm so annoyed with myself because I'm like, God, where would it be like as far as a player and somebody now if I had just like worked on it when I was younger.
But it comes to a place though. I mean, you have to be in a place to accept that, and I think that I love it because I always talk on here about how we always should keep broadening our toolbox. So as writers and producers, and I think that it's an interesting place to. It sounds like what you're doing is you're enjoying the process of getting better at something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a rarity because most people just want to sit down and play Imagine and get up and go have their coffee. Right. It's like that's happiness to them, and that's totally fine.
Which is fine, yeah.
So you've obviously come to a place, even if it was like last year where you started. Yeah. You're obviously in a place in your life where you've done certain things, and you have an ability and a willingness to test and learn and try things and get like you're open to stuff. Sure. And I think that it takes people a certain time to get to that place. Yeah. And I mean, there are people that are still in the vans that are our ages that are trying to do it too. And you've had that experience. And I think that, I think that's what makes your compositions so interesting to me. And especially the way that you, like the Jake record, where you kind of took the way that you interact with a lyricist. Sure. Like I think that you've learned that over the years because you've worked with so many singer-songwriters. Right. And I think that's what makes you different in your compositions because, I mean, I think that you're always grabbing melodies and stuff like that. But I think that classical music, specifically 1930s, started taking a place where it's like, let's just barrage people with all these crazy things and there's nothing to grab onto. Yeah. You know? So it's not dumbed down, but it's to the place where, as a human being, we can only take in so much. Sure. And I mean, do you feel like all of your experiences led you to the place where you were able to put on a classical piece and sit there and have not patience, but have the ability to fall in love with it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
What ear is that? Like, is it a developed ear as a producer? Like, what allows you to go to that place?
Honestly, it comes from a place of it, and any of my friends who know me would tell you, like, I'm kind of an asshole critic of people's music. Like, there's very little that, especially like a lot of bands that people would be like, hey, what do you like? I'm probably the only person on the planet who's like, yeah, Adele, she's fine. You know, like Adele's okay. She's got a great voice.
Yeah.
But there's all these like levels that I get into. I'm like, what is it she's trying to say? How does it interact with society? What is it actually doing for the betterment of like the forwardness of art? Is it throwback? I mean, it's like, you don't
it's the
want
lesser of many evils.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if there were 5 Adeles, you know, in
totally
different genres, like then they would rise to the top.
I mean, don't even get me started on Bruno Mars. You know what I mean? We'll be here all day. But I think honestly where it comes from is having been in. I mean, this band Tallest Trees I played in was out there. I mean, that way I was in this whole world of listening to nothing but like Animal Collective, Here Comes the Indian, like nearly unlistenable, you know, weird noise rock. And then we were making stuff like that. I mean, it's more in the vein of their later music, but I mean, I've been out to the fringes and back and like.
So you've always been investing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the thing for me is I've always been a little bit unhappy because the first time you like listen to the first, like you can probably imagine the first song you ever wrote, right? And then at that moment you understood song structure. You're like, yeah, there's or at least to an extent. You're like, right, there's a verse, there's a chorus, there's a bridge. Sometimes people mix that up, but for the most part, that's what it is, right? Mm-hmm. And you come across even like, you know, even the newest like Dirty Projectors record, which is incredible, has a certain structure to it that is like somewhat, you know, you listen to it the second time around and you're like, oh yeah, okay, cool, I got it. I mean, it's out there and it's wild and it's incredibly imaginative and incredibly creative, but I mean, I get it, you know? And there's something about lyrics that do that for me because they're like these weird place markers. As you're listening to music, this lyric is always attached to this, you know, certain thing. I don't know. But so I've always been like somewhat dissatisfied with so much music I've made or worked on with people. I mean, when I moved here, everyone was going nuts for like the Tom Petty documentary that had just come out. And I could care less about Tom Petty. But everyone I talked to would be like I had 5 different friends who were all trying to be in bands that sounded like Tom Petty. And everybody latched on to this very simplistic thing. Don't get me wrong, I love Tom Petty. He's fantastic in a way that I think that for what he does is great. Yeah. I don't respect him in the same way I respect like Messiaen or something. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, it comes from sitting down and saying, I'm going to listen to the Eroica Symphony, Beethoven's Third Symphony, right? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to give it like a full listen. And you could listen to that symphony 10 times in a row and it would still feel foreign in some ways because there's so much going on. I mean, you're talking about, I mean, I guess at that point it was probably 60, 70 person orchestra, not as big as they are now, but like, I mean, there's just so many levels to what themes and within themes and like, I mean, and that's like, to me, to sit down and be constantly surprised by how good something is, how timeless it is, even though, you know, you might hear it just in passing, you're like, oh, it's classical music, whatever. It's still, if you sit down and you give it a moment and you listen to, you know, you listen to the control of melody and harmony and passing melodies around, and I mean, you know, and then you take that forward to something, I mean, like, you know, Debussy's Images or like Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe, when it's like starting to experiment with this whole different way of structuring music and melody and tone and harmony. I mean, it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And for me, being able to sit down, listen to a piece of music, and every time I listen to it, feel inspired, not in a specific way, but just in different ways every time. I'll hear something that might inspire something. And I'm not to say that, like, you can't get that out of popular music. I mean, that's happened to me many, many times over, being inspired by any given piece, any record. I mean, Andy Schaaf put out this record called The Party, which is one of my favorite all-time records, and it's just incredible. Here We Go Magic. I mean, any of these bands, they write fairly simple music, but the simplicity is what makes it incredible too. But there's just something about the complexity of really great classical music that I just like. I mean, I'm kind of rambling at this point, but it just, every time I sit down and listen to Clair de Lune, or I sit down and play Clair de Lune, it's different to me. It feels like I can discover something new. I can, and then when you get to know a piece so well that you listen to different recordings of it, and you're able to decide the performances that you like, and or hear a performance of it that they might interpret a certain passage in a way. And that's another thing. I mean, to go on a totally kind of tangent from this, classical music is written to be performed and interpreted, where modern popular music is not.
Yeah.
Which is really kind of strange that we made this shift that the writer becomes the performer, where
it's almost a capitalist thing. It's like if I can make 5 water bottles for X amount of dollars.
Right.
If I can make a billion water bottles for X, it just makes more sense. Yeah.
Well, but it's
you mean Elvis can be in your living room?
Right.
Yes.
Right. but the thing but that goes back to music being a performance art, right? And just simply that you can have 3 different conductors interpret Beethoven's Fifth 3 completely different ways, and you listen to the recordings, and they are, if you've listened, to the recording, to a recording of it enough, I mean, it's one of the most, ubiquitous pieces of classical music. But just the simple fact that, just the conductor, one person out of this 100+ person ensemble that might be playing any given piece is going to interpret this piece a certain way, which is going to change how it's performed and maybe change how it communicates. Like, that's something that doesn't exist in pop music in the same way. I mean, even with Wild Cub, we'd go out, the performances would be different every night, but they're still kind of the same. And it's not like other bands, another band goes to cover that song and you turn your nose, you're like, this is a current band, why would you cover this? But a current composer might put something out and 3 different people do performances of it. I can't wait to hear so-and-so's different performance of like a Caroline Shaw quartet or something like that. I want to hear, not that she has a ton of different performances, but it just, the interpretation of something is what makes it so exciting as well. And also so like terrifying, because when you're writing something and then somebody plays it and it's like, oh, that's not exactly how I thought this was going to go over,
So you have expectations when you put it in front of people about.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
So you're hearing it in your head.
Yeah. Which is why I realize I'm not great at conducting, but I also don't really like doing it. Because that's all as though you're performing, like you are. Yeah, exactly.
You are playing an instrument.
Yeah, and you're going to be really focused on your own interpretation of it, and then if it's not coming across, you might be disappointed of it. But
but part of that would be learning how to express your interpretation, or how to express like what you need from people.
Right. Yeah, and not that I've had tons of experience doing that, but I mean, especially if you have the time to go through and rehearse and really pull a performance out of somebody that you really want.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the other thing with new composers. I read this all the time. Is it's like they rarely get much rehearsal time at all, which has got to be like. So then you got to sit there and you got to worry about writing a piece that's really easy to read.
That's a good point,
and you might want to try crazy things. And then, of course, that kind of segues into why I'm becoming so interested in doing music for film, because you don't necessarily have to get an incredible performance, because you can record it. And you can try weird, bow articulations or whatever until it's right.
Yeah.
Rather than being like, well, I hope we rehearse this enough that it's sunk in that, I want your bow way up on the neck. You know what I mean? Not just, yeah.
Well,
But-
it's interesting going back to the structure side of what you're saying. I think that certain people can look at a painting and find it beautiful, and certain people can look at that same painting and not find it beautiful at all, or
for sure.
not have the patience to observe it enough to get whatever.
Right.
I think about Jordan Peterson, who's one of my favorite people that I listen to. He talks about music as being just patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why we love music, because it needs to, if it's a certain type of pattern.
Sure.
So when classical music started kind of straying and like taking you, I mean, I look at jazz as an example of that. Like when Ornette Coleman brought his thing to it, that's where I checked out, because
Right.
I need a structure, I need a pattern.
Yeah.
I understand he was one of the best at, he's close to doing something, but my preference is when jazz went in that place, that's like I'm good. I'm going to go back. I'm not going to go forward.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think we as human beings, if you look at a pop song, it's going to be a pattern and it's going to have structure, but it's going to be a lot more simple to interpret.
Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely.
It's like a charcoal painting or something, or charcoal drawing.
Right.
Whereas what you're saying is you started to get in the last year, you started to look at these abstract things that take effort and take energy and take time. But it's interesting that you coming from a pop world where a lot of composers don't come from that world,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I think I think every composer should have to write a song or write a piece.
I agree.
Like
Yeah.
write a structured, like even a pop song. Like,
Yeah.
okay, here's your work today. Go write a 4-minute song.
Right. Right.
Because then they learn how simple that structure can be.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that if you look back at a Beethoven or even a Mozart, I think some of the best things that probably propelled them is the structure of, you're getting paid to do this, here's your time limit, write something.
Right.
Or here's the topic of this opera, here's the rules of the opera.
Sure.
Now go write that opera.
Yeah.
And I think that then pop music morphed into this, where they're giving you this 3-minute opera, or they're
Right.
giving you a movement of this opera.
Right.
And it's thinking so many different ways. Like it can go. I mean, now the lyrics are getting literal, and this opera is like bashing you over the head with like,
Sure.
I'm sorry that I did this. I'm sorry that I did
Right.
this. I still love you. Like it's like
Yeah.
it's getting more. There's no, the metaphor side of it is going away. But how important? I mean, when you talk about a Beethoven piece, I totally get it, because you're hearing so many different things, because it's like looking at an abstract painting, and every time you look at it, it's going to be different. This is not saying a different interpretation of a certain orchestra playing that piece.
Yeah.
I'm just saying the same orchestra, same recording, same time. I mean, you could sit there at 8:00 at night with a bourbon, and it's going to feel different than if you have it on in the morning and the
Right.
sun's shining and the
Yeah.
birds are out.
Yeah.
So you're seeing difference and hearing different things. And I love that, because there's so many layers to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But when you're sitting down and you're writing, I had Alex Wong on here, and we were talking about how many things people can hear at one time.
Sure.
And I believe the number was 3, and he had a definition for it, and I can't exactly remember what it was.
Mm-hmm.
When you're sitting and you're composing something, how is there always a consistent melody moving from place to place? And what are you have rules as far as it needs to be supported in this place and the melody can be here? Like what do you feel like you have discovered in what you're doing that is leading to a sound that you're looking for and moving
Mm-hmm.
towards?
Well, it's interesting, because I feel like, and granted, I haven't written a lot of performed classical pieces. I mean, classical is such a,
Well,
it's
you've written so many
yeah.
things. I mean, as a producer,
Yeah.
it's like, you've written
Well,
so much.
it really depends on what it is. Obviously, if it's a song, then I mean, like approaching a piece of commercial music, for
Yeah.
example, you might get a brief, and they might give you a whatever, like some temp music or something, and you find the thing in that is the supporting structure, and then you build around it, right? You might do the opposite for. I tend to do the opposite for when I'm writing a piece of classical music, because what I'm really interested is in being able to tell a story, and it doesn't have to follow a certain set of rules. You can end up at point Z without ever going back to point, whatever, H. You can just go through the whole thing. I mean, and you can weave in things that make the piece familiar throughout. I mean, a great example of is the first movement of, again, Ravel's only string quartet. And it has this line, and it's 9 minutes of him doing variations on that. But at no point, it's weird because you don't feel like you're getting bored of this theme because he's varying it and moving it around and reimagining it, and it's kind of fugal in that sense, right? Yeah. Or like Sibelius's Fifth Symphony, the last movement of that's one of my favorite pieces of all time, and the whole thing builds up. The first maybe minute and a half builds up to this beautiful, simple melody that then you only hear as a fleeting thing in the back 7 minutes of this piece. But the structure never goes to the same place. It's never like, and here's the chorus again. And there's plenty of Beethoven pieces that do that. Yeah. And there's plenty of, that's the whole idea behind a sonata, right? I mean, it's like...
And the time dictated it.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and it's a great point that, we do think in structure. I mean, you look at a piece of music, the reason people are able to sight read as well as they are is because you don't look at it note for note. As you know, you read it in blocks and structures and recognizable patterns and, and all of that. But
there are only so many combinations.
Right, yeah. But all that being said, within those ideas of structure, to me, you get to a point where you're an architect, say, right? Mm-hmm. You get to a point where you're tired of building. You're like, I can build a shed out back, or that's maybe not a great analogy. I can build a small, really rad 2-bedroom house, and I can only do that so many times before I'm like, how many ways can I make this 2-bedroom house? And then all of a sudden someone's like, what if you made a 5-bedroom house and it's, you can choose whatever landscape you want, and there's no rules to what you do. The only rule is that it has to, stand up when it's done. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like that. Like you get to a point
that's the rule that's interesting to me is it's got to stand up. It's got to be structurally sound.
Exactly. Yeah. But even so, the question is, what is structurally sound, right? I mean, you look at an abstract painting like, I don't know, like a Rothko piece or something like that. Like it's not really structure, it's just a gradient. The structure is maybe within the frame. That is, maybe the structure is just the...
that would be it. That would be the box. The box is the box is the frame of this piece. You cannot leave this area.
And for me, there is a level at which I don't like serialism and Schoenberg and all that. The Vienna School of Music. Yeah. That's where it loses me. Yeah. I'm not interested in it. I mean, there's a certain amount of it that if there is even like...
Doesn't it feel good to say that?
Oh God,
I'm just not into it.
I'm really not into it. I mean, and it's a shame to me because I feel like in a lot of academia right now, it's still what composers will push people to do, and which is all well and good, and which is why I love a lot of these composers who are in New York right now, who I just think are fantastic, like Caroline Shaw and Christopher Zerone and Judd Greenstein, who are all these Yale folks. And they came out and they write some of the most melodic, post-genre music you'll ever hear. I mean, it's weird. Not weird in the sense that strange, but it skirts norms of conventions. Yeah. But it's still recognizable and still, they're painting with the same colors, but they're doing it in a totally different way.
Well, I think that's that's the key is what you're saying is they're doing something. They're painting. They're making a piece of art. I feel like some of the academia situation is like they're doing. Obviously, there's an element of, okay, I need to practice. I mean, if the basics of this is I need to practice my scales so that I can play. Right. It's like that's the basic of it. Or I need to learn this paint stroke so that I can have that in my bag of tricks. And academia is that, but I hear so much and I see so much in the jazz scene specifically, but also in the classical scene where it's like they're just doing something for the sake of doing it.
Right.
Like there's no purpose behind it. It's like, that's a really cool technique. I'm gonna write something like that.
Right.
It's like, well, what is? Then you have to ask yourself,
Yeah,
what's
like
the
12
purpose
tone,
of that?
12
Yeah,
tones,
it's
that's
like,
it.
I'm gonna write this piece. I'm gonna do this. Like,
Yeah.
there's no patience for self-discovery, if you know what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah,
it's like
I mean,
nobody's sitting there going. I mean, that's part of self-discovery because you're trying
Sure.
something. But there's a certain time in your career where you do that. But then people never get out. Like if they're in the academia situation, like they're in that. Especially what happens is you can't make a living at it, so you have to go back and you cycle back into teaching it, and you're in that headspace always, and you don't have the freedom to just. I mean, sabbaticals exist,
Yeah.
but you don't have the freedom really to take it out, and you've never really gone through that process of let me discover what's me, what I want to do, what my strengths are.
Sure.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
It's a hard life.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't pay the bills. You know.
Yeah.
Like, but if the structure exists within, you're like, I think that's brilliant. Like we're talking about with the movies, I think that's the perfect place for somebody like yourself. You have a structure, and there's probably going to be a paycheck associated, but you also have the time to find a sound.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always believed in that. I mean, I don't think that you have to go and jump off a bridge and just be like, oh, I'm going to do this with my career. And I'm going to, just take this big leap and just like be poor and just like live in that. It's like, no, find somebody to pay you so you can learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what academia is, because you're getting paid to have a job and then you can write on the side. But I find that you get out of that hustle headspace. And I think that hustle headspace is what makes you who you are.
Sure.
And I think that I'm really excited for you going out to LA to be able to start working on, we've had this first conversation, like I want to meet some indie writers, some film people.
Right.
And I want to just do some stuff.
Yeah.
I want to make some music.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's your version of it, and paycheck will probably come with that, and it might not be a James Horner paycheck, but it'll be a paycheck.
Yeah.
And for now, and it's like, you're learning your sound and your craft.
Right.
And you're not doing it for, it just drives me so crazy. Like a 12 tone is an example. It's like, I taught a class on that today, and I have to do something to show them what this sounds like. So you sit there on your weekend and you write this piece to bring, and it's like, no, where's your soul? Where's your heart?
Also, you didn't write that piece. Your 12-tone Matrix wrote that piece.
Matrix wrote.
Yeah.
Like why? Like why does that exist?
Yeah.
Like when did math become part of this?
I know.
You know?
I mean, it is interesting. To talk about that, I read a whole, because when I first started like looking at 12-tone technique and studying about Schoenberg and all that stuff, I was like angry.
Yeah.
I was angry at Schoenberg for
Yes.
doing this. But what was interesting to me about it, just to go on a quick tangent of it, is his whole reasoning for doing it was to get rid of the weight of tonic, right?
Yeah.
So we say everything is trying to find its way back home.
I
And
can
he was
see
like,
that.
what if we made all notes equal?
Good idea. Ideas always start innocent, by the way. And
Yeah,
then they get
yeah.
screwed up. Keep going. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, to me, it just sounded like an experience. I don't know. I mean, I can't get into it. And there's plenty of atonal music that I can get into and I can really respect. Like Penderecki is a great example
I'm not
of
familiar
somebody.
with that,
Penderecki is he's responsible for basically the sound of all modern horror movies. His string quartet was in The Exorcist.
Okay.
He does these things where he essentially will have an entire orchestra play every note in a scale, all at like sul ponticello, and then just have them slide up slowly, every single note on a keyboard, and it's just the most.
I have a
It's
few
insane.
samples in my studio of that sound.
Yeah, exactly. So, or the
Okay,
really
cool.
like.
Yeah, I was going to say the high trills.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
very Penderecki, and I
Okay.
can appreciate that. Am I
Absolutely.
going to sit down and listen to that? No.
Well, because it's
absolutely
servicing
not,
a
but-
film. It's not servicing.
Well, no, I mean,
did he start that way?
he wasn't I mean, he was a Yale fellow. He might have been a professor at Yale. He's a I want to say he's Ukrainian. I could be
Okay.
totally wrong about that, but. He wrote for concert and wrote this stuff.
wrote it
But he
like
was
that.
one of the
Okay.
first people to kind of take this atonal idea, but give it some kind of structure or some kind of like, because that's the whole point of serialism is that it completely throws the weighting of notes and harmony out the window. And the whole idea was like we should change how we understand and listen to music and tones and all this stuff. I mean, you can go into like arguments for microtonal music and the fact that like Indian music has 24 tones, right?
Yeah, I
or
was
like
gonna say the
anything.
half step,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
quarter steps, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, which I understand to an extent, but I also think that I appreciate people who push the boundaries.
Of course. And ideas always start innocent like
exactly.
that.
I honestly think that we have to have those people. We have to, otherwise we'd still be playing in Gregorian chant with,
Of course.
perfect fourths and fifths everywhere, right? Like, thirds and all that stuff would we have to have
we
people
could never
who are
know
pushing,
if we're happy or sad.
Yeah, exactly. we have to have people that push the boundaries. But what I'm interested in is not pushing the boundaries. I'm interested in connecting. I'm interested in how I can contribute with I'm just not that person. I like connecting with people. I like feeling communal. I like being able to communicate an emotion and have that emotion reciprocated. That's what I'm interested in. And I think there's this whole kind of like banging of heads between the people in academia who say to somebody like Aaron Copland, you're selling out for writing Appalachian Spring, and get mad at him for being a sellout and writing commercial music. Yeah. And those people in a certain way, not understanding that music to me, it is the universal form of human communication. It completely transcends any sort of culture or any sort of language. You can play a certain melody for two people who lived in completely different circumstances, and there's a good chance they'd have a similar emotional connection to it. And that, to me, is what's fascinating about music. Yeah. And when you get to these academics who are like, their whole thing is like trying to be as smart and as clever as possible, and that's fine. That I think people should push the boundaries, but to box it in that way and to say that somebody like, Nico Muhly being on Mozart in the Jungle, is like selling out or doing a certain thing, or whoever, like doing a commercial thing that's very accessible to people is like selling out and not. You're opening
the world to so many more people. And but the hilarious part of that is, academia exists, and it's like, okay, well, we need to make more money in this music department. Let's have a class on 12 tone. It's like, you don't need that.
Right.
You need like one class on that.
Yeah.
But you don't need like a full 3-hour accredited course. So but what these people don't realize is the greatest gift that's ever been given is these film composers that write these beautiful, somewhat simple melodies. Like,
they're always simple.
Those are the people when they're kids that hear that and they're like, I want to be a composer.
Right.
Then they go to school and pay your bills for your job.
Sure.
Like, that's why you're tenured, because they got excited about a piece of music.
Yeah.
And then they rip that excitement away.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, well, let's make this nuts and bolts and put math behind it. It's like, it's not what it's about.
Well, and I think that there's also this whole thing, and not to go into any kind of political conversation or anything like that, but there is a thing where people think of like, well, art should be separate from commercialism and all these other things. And in principle, yes, but the whole thing about art is that we're trying to connect with each other, right? And for better or worse, we live at a time when we've accepted a certain way that we live in a society. Yep.
So
I don't have any problem with people doing the weirdest, out there, most off-the-grid thing. I love that. I wish there were more people like that. But to come down on somebody who's like, especially like some, I've heard of, it's like composers looking down on, it's like, oh, you're a composer, do you write for film? It's like, no, I'm a composer.
Yeah.
It's like this idea that writing for film, because I think film is the perfect art form. It is the art form that encompasses all other art forms. Yeah. It's like the box in which the great melting pot of all art. And to make a truly great film, it requires a village of people. It can't just be one. You see, like even Shane Kurth, who's an incredible filmmaker who did like Primer and Upstream Color, and like he composed the music and produced and directed and wrote and did all this stuff. Even those films, it's like you can tell, it's like it's done by one person. Yeah. But the idea behind making art and doing these things, to me, is not about pushing the boundaries of human existence, but it's about figuring each other out and not how we can go out, but maybe how we can look in a little more, and how that maybe translates into going out. It's like you can't force people to think a certain way if they haven't internalized that as a personal thing, right? That's a really vague statement, but so that's what's interesting to me, and why film is so interesting to me, and why like music that is like at the same time that it pushes how deep you have to think about something, like classical music can at the same time convey a very tangible and accessible emotion.
And accepted. It's accepted, yeah.
And that's what I don't know. That's what it boils down to for me.
Well, and I think that people have this thing because they have to protect themselves in today's world because there's so much, like, there's just in general, there's so much coming at them, whether it's like, there's so much. There's media coming at them. There's politics coming at them. There's like life realities coming at them. There's so much that's coming at you now because you're so stimulated. And I think it's not so much that people are allowing it to come out, but they're not allowing enough stuff to come into themselves.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Yeah,
yeah. I think that's why you're seeing all of this, like the mental health issues that are happening in the world. I mean, that's a whole other topic, but which I have talked about on here. But yeah, like the mental health issues where people don't feel comfortable opening up about that and don't feel comfortable talking about it because they show any kind of that type of that weakness. And it goes to our ingestion of art. I mean, it's like, I think film is the only way that you can hear a piece of classical music and get it to the mainstream. Like other people have to seek that out. Like you're not turning on the television to listen to a classical piece. You have to like get up off your ass and you have to go to a show or go to Spotify and find it. It's like you're not seeing advertisements for the latest rendition of Beethoven's Fifth.
Sure.
You're seeing advertisements and you're seeing TMZ, you're seeing Justin Bieber, and it's like, and there's nothing against Justin Bieber, he's a great Canadian. But you're seeing Justin Bieber and he's flashed everywhere, and then it's like, and by the way, he's got a new song out, but it's the last thing people care about. Right. So you have to find a way, you have to put the effort in. And I think that's the thing is people are having trouble putting effort in because they're so tired and inundated by having to deal with just all the things that are coming at them.
Well, but I think at the same time, something that's been really refreshing for me is it's like the if you want to learn to be patient, put yourself in situations where you're required to be patient.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So
that's a skill.
Yeah. If you want to learn to sit and be still and enjoy a piece of art, then you have to decide to do it. And that's what's so great to me. That's what's been so great about it because I don't think the problem is that we're not ingesting enough. I think that we're ingesting so much that we can't hold it in. We are. But
what are we ingesting? Are we ingesting McDonald's versions of things, or are we ingesting?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think
much of that is what it is.
And not to say that there aren't some great. There's not some fantastic, really thoughtful, really thought-provoking pop music that's coming out because there absolutely is. Absolutely is. But that's not to say that the whole idea behind the machine of how all that works, especially in current culture with how we consume things at such a rapid pace, I think that what we're missing, and even in a communal sense, what we're missing is sitting down and just taking a minute and just ingesting something.
But no, dude, I got to work 20 hours a day, man.
Right.
I got to work 20 hours a day.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, that's why, coming to do this was really exciting to me because it's like, let's sit down and just talk for an hour and a half about whatever. And it's why it's, I love sitting down, turning on 91.1 and just, as super cliche and
but you're not making money, man.
Yeah.
You're not pushing forward, man. Just people have to invest in that and realize that that's the long-term investment. Is that time. I totally agree with you on that.
Well, that's a whole other conversation is we're so concerned with the now. It's like no one's playing the long game anymore.
That's who wins. I totally believe that.
And so, that's another thing is going back to talking about playing cello again. I'm like, I was like, man, how good would I be now if I had, when I started playing cello at 20, 13 years later, how good would I be at this instrument? Probably pretty good.
Yeah.
And so rather than
but something told you at 13 to stop,
Yeah.
And all this stuff leading up to it has served a purpose.
Right. And I'm not discounting any of that, but I'm saying rather than bemoaning wow, I really missed that opportunity, saying well, if I do that now, how good am I going to be when I'm 40?
Yeah.
Good and looking forward and playing the long game and saying I'm going to invest in this.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, especially classical music in another sense, it is a style of music that requires investment to play.
Yeah.
You can't just like sit down and learn 3 chords and then all of a sudden you're playing every Bob Dylan song in the book. You know, you have to learn, you have to invest in the not just the technique, but the emotion of it. And how to communicate.
The technique to have the emotion, so you don't have to think about the technique.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to me, I just like the idea of it is work, but it's work for the long game. It's work for something down the road that may pay off. But what you're going to look at is when you get to that point, when I am 40 and I can play the Benjamin Britten cello suite front to back, which would be incredible. I can look back and be like, man, I feel so fulfilled that I put in the time to do that. Yeah. And what I learned along the way and what I wrote along the way that came from taking the time to learn it, that came from sitting down and listening to 10 versions of, this piece of music, that came from like ingesting it. I'm a much richer person now because of it. Yeah. And I didn't waste time being like, I can't tell you, I can't, I don't even know what I was listening to music-wise 10 years ago, from a pop standpoint. Yeah. Like, I can't tell you what was like the hit indie single in, 2008. Like, maybe somebody, I'm just not that person, But what I look at is, like, the things that I've spent time on and really invested in and how that has made existence more fruitful. And so that's what classical music is to me, because all aspects of it require that. It requires time and effort and patience, and it requires you to love it. You can't just, I don't know. You can, but if you really want
it's an investment in yourself. It's an investment. If you invest in, if that's what you love and you invest in it, I think that's an incredibly valuable thing.
Yeah.
I think that's the message. Even if you're not in music and you're a painter, it's like, just keep getting better at it.
Right.
It's discipline. It's about discipline, but you have to love it. And then the discipline is the big part.
Yeah.
Because there are days you're going to pick up the cello and it's going to suck.
Yeah. That's pretty much every other day for me.
It's like there are days I pick up the flute and I want to throw it through the damn window.
Yeah.
But there are days I pick it up and I'm like, oh, that's it.
Yeah.
It's there.
Absolutely.
So, and those are the days you hope for. It's no different. If you're a runner, it's the same day. Like, there's days you go out, it's hot, you're sweating, and it sucks, and you're going up a hill, and you feel like crap because maybe you ate something bad the day before.
Right.
And then there's days you go out, and you're just like, wow, this feels great. And those are the days. You go through the pain to get to those days.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Let's leave it at that, man.
Yeah.
So how do people find you?
You can go to my website, dabneymorse.com. It's got a link to my SoundCloud that has a couple pieces I'm proud of, and then a ton of pretty cliche trailer and commercial music. Nice. But it's all pretty fun. Mm-hmm. That's the best way.
What are you on? What's your handle on Instagram?
Dabney Morse. It's all Dabney Morse everywhere, man.
You got it all.
Yeah.
You got it in there.
You got
early.
me on Twitter. You got me on Instagram. You got me on Facebook.
Well, you need to put a bio up so people can realize the stuff that you do.
I know. Yeah, it's all stuff that's like, I
kind of
did this. I kind of did that.
Speak through your music, man.
Yeah.
You could do that too.
Yeah, my Wikipedia page is just going to be you hit play on something.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
You might be onto something.
Yeah.
Huh.
I'm copywriting that idea right now.
I know.
Don't steal it. Dabney Morris, Tyler Summers Podcast.
Wikipedia play.
What is the name of this podcast?
It's called Tyler Summers Talks to Interesting Humans.
Oh, wow.
And you are an interesting human.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah, I have a feeling we're probably going to do this again because there's more things we probably should
I
have
would
gone
love
on
it.
Tangents.
Yeah, you let me know. I'm there.
Yeah, I'll have to come to LA and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can come. We'll set up in. We got a great yard at our.
You got the place right.
Yeah.
You're ready to go out.
There. Yeah.
Good. I saw the picture of it. It's awesome.
Yeah,
man.
It's exciting.
Man, well, thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's great.
Watch this heavy heart of mine turn this water into wine. Light your match and let it glow, so I know my way home. One more game of tic-tac-toe. You be X and I'll be you. Fall in love like dominoes, then I'll come back home. if I can't find you, go get lost in the simple things. Might I remind you, chase your tail and dream those dreams. One more glass to set me free, forget right past what's in front of me. I'll be fine, they tell me so.